Hello and welcome to Midwest Writers Room. Our mission is to encourage, educate, and celebrate writers of the Midwest. I'm Luella Schmidt.
And I'm Ken Humphrey. Today we're interviewing Scott McConnaha, a poet living in Plymouth, Wisconsin. He's the author of a recently published poetry chapbook titled Without a Prayer, and his work has appeared in Mobius, America, Door is Ajar, New Verse News, and Moss Piglet, among other literary publications.
Scott is an Army veteran, former middle school and high school teacher, journal editor, and healthcare administrator. He and his wife Colleen have 4 children and 2 grandchildren. He holds master's degrees in English and moral theology and an MBA. Scott is a member of the Wisconsin Fellowship of Poets and the Wisconsin Writers Association and is on the board of directors of the Sheboygan Symphony Orchestra. Scott, we are so happy that you're here with us today. How you doing?
Very good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being invited to be on your podcast. I've been a fan for quite some time.
Well,
Thank you.
that's great to hear. And with it being April Poetry Month, I'm glad we're talking to another poet for this. And so before we talk about the poetry itself, we got to talk about you. We got to talk about Scott McConnaha. And one of the things that we always like to do is kind of delve into that origin story. Like how did you get to the place you are today? So you had a master's degree in English. Did you get that with the idea that you would actually be writing, or did you have some other occupation in mind when you got that?
I got that when I was teaching English and Spanish in a middle school and high school. It was a combined building in a northern suburb of St. Louis. That's where my wife and I met when we were both undergrads at St. Louis University. And the school sent me back for my graduate degree in English just to kind of advance my skills for being a teacher. But funny enough, the same year that I got my master's in English was when I decided teaching's not for me. So that's when I left with that. And also funny, though it wasn't funny at the time, people who know me like to joke about me having a master's in English, since the class that was going to keep me from graduating high school was in fact English. I was not one of those kids who always had his nose in the book. My parents did not have to tell me to get outside and play, because that's where I was, just running around, playing Army, getting into trouble with my friends. And I just had no interest in reading or writing. And it didn't really click. I didn't fall in love with it until I got into college.
And so then kind of what landed you on poetry as opposed to becoming a novelist or a nonfiction writer?
Yeah, I think first it wasn't the love of poetry, it was the love of the poets. I just loved the stories about the poets that I was studying in undergrad and then in grad school when I was getting my master's in English. And I just loved the mythologies that built up around them. In fact, my wife and I, we got married in 1993, and we took our honeymoon in Ireland. And one of the places we went, which was sort of a pilgrimage for me, was Tour Ballylee, which is a stone tower that the poet William Butler Yeats purchased and had refurbished and lived there for a short time. I don't even know if it was a full year with his young family. But going there was like, standing outside of the home of one of your favorite rock stars as a kid. It was just, it was something that I aspired to be a poet. But again, using the rock star analogy, I had all these dreams of thousands of adoring fans, but never bothered to take music lessons and couldn't sing. So I was not a very successful poet early on. I tried a little bit. I actually did write a novel, completed it. It went nowhere. Wrote a couple screenplays with a buddy of mine from college. Those didn't go anywhere. And I ended up just kind of setting that creative aspiration, the creative side, on the back burner as career and family and things like that started taking over.
So I believe you're kind of discussing the cult of personality, right? You love the
Yeah,
poets as much as the poetry. That's That's a great analogy
Yeah.
there. And, in terms of having thousands of adoring fans, I mean, it's not all it's cracked up to be. I have thousands, but they get expensive to keep on the payroll. So I
Yes,
cut them
I'm
all
sure.
loose. Now I have no fans.
Okay, I have to just butt in here. Really? I mean, I'm one. I'm one of your adoring fans, just for the record.
Yes. Thankfully, she works on a
Yes,
volunteer
you can
basis.
count me too. It's funny in terms of being a fan, and at a time in my early 20s, we're married. We had at least one kid, maybe had two by then. I was really feeling this urge to be a poet. And I wrote a letter this was before email. I hand wrote a letter to Wendell Berry, who is a poet, an essayist, um, does a lot of writing and speaking on behalf of family farmers, and just the farming industry. And he lives on his family farm in rural Kentucky. And I just loved his poetry. And I wrote him and said, kind of here's where I am right now. I really want to be a poet. Should I just give everything up and give my life over to the art? And he actually wrote me back a handwritten note. It was just a few sentences, and it was on a piece of yellow legal paper that he tore in half. I suppose he used the other half for someone else's letter. But he told me, and these aren't his exact words, but this was the gist of it: get your head out of the clouds and take care of your family. That's what you need to be doing right now. The poetry will come if you just give it time to kind of just simmer inside. You'll get around to it eventually, but now's not the time, is what he told me. And of course, I was heartbroken. I wanted him to tell me, well, of course, that's the only way you can be a poet. Give everything up and live for your art. But no, he talked to me as if my own dad were giving me advice.
Yeah, the life of a tortured artist isn't all it's cracked up to be sometimes.
No, precisely. Yeah.
You have mortgages, you got to put gas in the car and all that stuff.
Yep.
So now, as you look at yourself today, are you more of a reader on a regular basis today than you were as a kid? I mean, has it grown on you?
Yeah, much more, much more. I would say I spend most of my reading time, reading poetry. I find inspiration, get ideas from other poets. I mean, it's a cliche, but we've all heard the advice: to be a writer, you need to read. So I do that, and I actually like picking up poetry collections from local Wisconsin authors. So whenever I'm in a bookstore, I go straight to the poetry section. I check to see if they carry local authors. And a lot of times I'll come out of the store with one or two, along with somebody who's um, better known on a national level. Yeah.
So, well, that's probably a good point to kind of drop a self-serving announcement that, hey, Katrina Surway, WWA member, just launched her WWA Press poetry book, 1,000 Miles of Ice. That was 1,000 Miles of Ice?
1,000 miles of poetry. Yeah, that's going to be my good news later. So stay tuned, listeners.
Yeah, I probably spoiled the lead on that one.
That's
So
okay.
Scott, you've got somebody tells you can only have 3 poets that you can read for the rest of your life. What names
Wow.
bubble to the top?
Oh, that's a tough one. Probably William Butler Yeats, Rainer Maria Rilke, and Jim Harrison, who's a little more contemporary. He just died a few years ago.
That's impressive. Lowell, how many times have we asked a similar question like that and people just kind of like, oh, I don't know. Scott, you know.
But you know what? If you ask me again in a half hour, I'm probably going to have 3 different names.
I was going to say that's my problem is I could never only pick 3.
Right.
Don't limit me.
Exactly.
All right, so let's switch then to Without a Prayer, your chapbook. First off,
Sure.
when did that come out? And then, talk us through the genesis of that. Not necessarily the why, but what's the theme, if there is a theme, how you constructed it.
Yeah. So the title Without a Prayer kind of represents the umbrella theme of and this isn't new. This is something that I have kind of wrestled with my whole life. This overarching theme of faith and God, finding one's place in the world, finding how faith fits into my life and has evolved over time. One thing that wasn't mentioned in my bio, because I didn't tell you about it, after the Army, I went into the seminary. So those were like the two jobs, the two dream jobs I had as a kid growing up. I would go back and forth between wanting to be a soldier, dreaming about battlefield glories, and then dreaming about being a priest. So I would focus on one for several weeks and then get bored with that, focus on the other. And I ended up trying both out. Happened to have met my wife while I was in the seminary studying for the priesthood. So I took that as a sign that maybe God had a different plan for me in my life. So Without a Prayer covers kind of the big overarching themes of how faith and my understanding of mine and everybody's place in the world has evolved, but it's also dealing with some personal issues. Our oldest daughter has just gone through cancer treatment. She's fine now, but it was pretty difficult to watch her go through that. So I've got some things in there about that. Some life decisions, like my decision to retire. The last job I had, I was the CEO of a small health system that oversaw a handful of hospitals and nursing homes located throughout the Midwest. And it was owned and operated by a group of Franciscan sisters who were based in Manitowoc. And I ran their healthcare ministry. So dealing with that, when and how to decide it's time to retire, it's time to step aside and let somebody else take the reins. That's a lot of what I grapple with throughout the poems. But it wasn't with the intention, or let me say, the poems weren't pursued with the intention of them being in a book one day. I simply decided after I retired to start devoting time to writing, which is something I had always wanted to do, but never really felt I had the freedom to do it. And now I do. And I thought, okay, I need to give this the same dedicated time and energy and effort that I would my actual paying job. And I've been pretty good about getting to my desk every morning. It doesn't always result in a nicely produced poem, but I'm at least making sure that I'm showing up for the work. And it was going to, back to liking reading poetry collections from fellow Wisconsin poets. That's where I was introduced to this concept of a chapbook, which for listeners who aren't familiar with what that is, it's essentially a smaller, almost pamphlet-sized collection of poems, usually 20, 30, 40 poems, not quite as big as a full collection of poetry. So I gathered a bunch of poems that I thought fit in a nice theme and just started sending it out to different publishers. I got rejected by a few I never heard from, but the executive editor and publisher at Rockwood Press, which is based in Portland, Oregon, wrote back and said he liked the collection and offered me a contract. So that was kind of where that all began. And it came out in December of 25, just this past December.
Wow. And so I want to loop back on something you said. One of my favorite archetypes it pops up a lot more probably in historical writings or fantasy writings, the archetype of the warrior priest. right?
Oh,
The
yeah,
split personalities, torn
yeah.
between a role that is predominantly, I don't want to say violence based, but action based, and
Hmm.
a role that is more spiritually based, right? And the dichotomy of somebody who lives within that. When you were talking about, do I want to be a soldier? Do I want to be a priest? That just hit me right away. I'm like, oh, the warrior priest archetype. That's very, very cool. Always like that.
Yeah, I like that. And that makes perfect sense. For a long time, I didn't understand. It felt like two exact polar opposites. But I think there are some internal things that make those two kind of similar in what one pursues.
Well, and I think the Shaolin monks have shown that you can definitely embody that, as a
Yes.
discipline throughout your entire life, even
Yeah.
across the centuries. All right,
Yeah.
Luella, let's jump into our WWA message.
You got it.
Folks, join us tomorrow, April 21st, as Katrina Surwey takes WWA members through a workshop on the craft of poetry. With this being April Poetry Month, we want to make sure we bring as much as we can to you. If you're interested, learn more at wiwrite.org under the events menu section.
All right. Back to Scott. I want to connect back on something that Ken said about the warrior priest archetype, which I did
Yes.
not connect to at all until you said it. And I was like Googling in behind the scenes here to learn
Ah,
more about it. And I just want to read this quick. So, the warrior priest archetype merges the spiritual devotion, wisdom, and sacred connection of a priest with the courage, protective strength, and disciplined combat skills of a warrior. And I thought that was so interesting to put that all together in the midst of hearing your story, Scott, because you can totally see that through line now a little bit. I
yeah.
can anyway.
Yeah. I think I mean, obviously, I have changed a lot in the 35 plus years since that time in my life, but I was searching for, the structure, the discipline, the kind of set up schedule for one's life, if I can put it in those terms. And both of them, military, seminary, priesthood, they offered that. And that was part of what I think I was looking for or hungering for at that time.
Can we circle back to the title that you chose? Without a prayer, I think you could assume is hopelessness, but I'm assuming that is not actually the case. I'm curious why you chose that title.
You know, I think I chose that title because my understanding of my practice of um, prayer has changed over the years. So it's not, it can um, elicit a sense of hopelessness, and in some of the poems, that comes across. I'll read one here in a little bit that is related to the experience of watching our daughter go through cancer treatment. Um, but I think it's also just back to when I wanted to be a priest and in my 30s. What seemed clear, what seemed um, true about everything that I had grown up with, um, church wise, with faith. I was just starting to question and starting to wonder about and wanting to explore and find things out on my own, and not just what was kind of fed to me as a child and then a young man.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that. That makes total sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned that you are trying to kind of approach this part of your life where, with some discipline, you try to be at your desk at a certain time. Do you have kind of a routine that you would consider your writing practice or how, tell us a little bit about your personal discipline?
Yeah, well, I don't have to wake up with an alarm anymore like I used to, but for whatever reason, I'm naturally up between 5 and 5:30 every morning. Um, have my first cup of coffee just sitting on the couch looking out the window. Then I get to my desk, which is the room I'm in right now. It's one of the it's the basement bedroom of our kids when they still lived here, that they would rotate through. This was the room they all wanted because it was away from everybody else in the rest of the house, and it was their own little area. So now it's mine. So I get down here to my desk with some poetry books that I'm going through. I like to read them almost as if it were a daily meditative practice. And they change all the time, which ones I'm reading. So I'll read a poem from one book and then another book, and then just sit and think for a little bit about it. And then pull up my list of poetry ideas or poems that I currently have in the works and just see if one of them feels like something I want to tend to at that moment. And I've got some poems that I started more than a year ago that I just haven't gotten back to because for whatever reason, I was motivated about it then. I'm just not feeling it now. So that's pretty much my routine. I'll do that till about 10 in the morning. And then get up. I need to get up from my desk a little bit. The inspiration for me never happens while I'm sitting there wanting to write a poem. It's always when I'm doing something else. So I know I need to get out and go somewhere and do something.
So where do you seem to find your inspiration? Are you more of a nature guy or being around people, or what do you find kind of strikes you the most?
I would say it's all of the above.
Yeah.
It's funny. More than once, I have had to stop mowing the lawn, run up the hill to where my phone is on the chair on the patio, jot down something real quick on a notes page that I was thinking of while I was mowing, and then get back to it later. So it'll be there. It'll be while I'm taking a walk in the woods or just a walk through town. And it's either something about that encounter or that experience I was having that I think should be in a poem, or something I'm experiencing reminds me of something from my childhood that I then write a poem about.
Yeah. I love that. I love that inspiration just sort of hits us sometimes when we're never when we want it, of course. You have to
Yeah,
kind of create the conditions for it to arise almost.
right. When I decided to retire from my job, and it was a long year of discerning if this was the right thing to do, because it was a big step for me, for us. I finally decided to, and my wife, she sensed before I did that because of the bigness of this decision, I needed to mark it with something equally big. So thought about it for a while, and we had been to Scotland before. One of our kids studied, well, three of our four kids did study abroad programs, but one of them we went to visit and got to see Scotland while we were over there. So I booked a very remote cottage on the Isle of Skye, which is in the north of Scotland, and just stayed there by myself for a couple of weeks in January. Not this past January, a year ago, January. And that's kind of where my creative side woke back up from what I had set aside, in my early adult years. That's when I finally gave myself permission to start pursuing this. And on one of my walks near the cottage, there was a hillside that had a lot of streams running down towards the ocean. There was a little inlet by my cottage. And seeing those streams reminded me of when I was a kid. I grew up in Nebraska. And for many years, we lived in Bellevue, which is a suburb of Omaha. And we used to hang out by the railroad tracks a lot. And there was a stream there. It was called Coffin Springs. And for some reason, seeing these little streams in Scotland reminded me of that. And I've got a poem that I'm working on right now, not quite finished. I don't know where it's going to go, but it's just remembering getting up to no good as kids and just being gone all day long, from home in the summertime.
I remember those days too, being gone
Yes.
all day in the summertime.
Mhm.
It's a generation maybe that we're all familiar with.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, I thought it was so interesting the way you said gave yourself permission to start pursuing this.
Yeah.
I don't know. Could you just say another few words about that? I thought that was an interesting way to phrase it, that you needed permission somehow.
I needed permission for myself.
Hmm.
Nobody else was going to say, don't do this. They were all for it, especially my wife. Um, but when I was back in career mode, when that was the focus of my life, I could have been writing, I suppose. And I know people do that. There are many successful writers who also worked a regular 9 to 5 job. But for some reason, I just did not have the energy, um, the focus, when I get home from work because I'm worn out from the work, or in the morning, because I had to be at work early. That means I have to wake up now at 4 if I want to write. And I can't write very productively when I'm groggy and just out of bed. So I needed to make a clean break in order to now jump headfirst into the writing. It took a while. I didn't call myself, I didn't even tell people that I was retired until relatively recently. For the longest time, I've called it an open ended sabbatical because I just thought, okay, I'll do this for a little bit, I'll write, and then I'll just see what's out there and go back to work. But I have recently, the recent month or two, finally committed to saying, all right, I'm retired from work, but now I'm doing this, and it's all about kind of a if not now, when sort of thing. I'll be 60 in a few years, and I do a lot. Maybe this is morbid. I do a lot of kind of deathbed meditations, of thinking of myself on my deathbed and measuring decisions by, is this something I will have been proud of, or is this something I will have regretted not doing? And if I didn't get around to doing this writing, I think I would have just had many years of regret.
I love that. That was a good answer. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think a lot
yeah,
of people can relate to that, particularly the needing of feeling permission somehow. Um,
yeah.
well, so we're gonna move on to the special sauce question in a second, but before I do, what are you working on currently? Anything new? Or are you still riding the wave of publication yet?
Well, I've actually been um, wrestling with that a little bit, and I'm feeling rather unproductive lately. I'm not getting a lot written, and I like the way you just said that, kind of riding the wave of publication. So I feel like that's that's kind of starting to quiet down a little bit. The book came out in December, and I've spent a lot of time just with that, the stuff involved with having a book come out. And I've been telling myself one of these nights I need to go to bed and say, tomorrow you are going to start writing again in earnest. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't been writing at all. I have, but I'm just not hitting it with the same intensity that I did leading up to the book. And I've come across other writers who have experienced the exact same thing. You put a lot of effort and energy into a project, it's completed, it's out there. It's kind of hard to pick right back up again and start creating. So I think I need to do that.
Yeah, there are definitely seasons for sure. No
Yeah,
guilt intended in that question, Scott.
right. Yeah, thank you. Now back to um, kind of the inspirations for poems. There is one, and I mentioned that I wanted to read this, that's related to my daughter going through cancer, and this also ties in where I am faith wise. So my daughter and her family, she's got two little ones. She's got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and she and her husband, they live in Michigan. She's working on her PhD at Michigan State. And She had had cancer 10 years before when she was an undergrad at St. Norbert College in Green Bay. And the same cancer returned last year. She's gotten through it. She's fine. But her church does this cool thing that I hadn't heard of before. And maybe you have. It's this prayer shawl kind of ritual. So there are a group of knitters in her church who knit these prayer shawls. Then they come to the homes of people who are sick, who belong to their church, and they have a little ceremony. So observing that, I was inspired to write this poem. So I'd like to read it for you. This is called Prayer Shawl. In that moment, I believed in God. When she wrapped you in the prayer shawl and told of the women at church who meet on Saturdays to knit and talk and laugh, and how one is much faster than the others, and the hidden smile we shared when she said she also runs the funeral lunches. In that moment, when she prayed for healing and offered communion around your coffee table, I conceded sacrament. And that it was an important experience for me. And it touched me in ways that didn't really unfold until I started working on the poem. And that's one of the things I love about writing poetry. I'll think about something, I'll question something or wonder about, and it's not until I start kind of the practice of writing it out in poetry form, which is different than journaling about something. But writing it out is when it kind of hit me how I felt in that moment, in those 20 minutes, in my daughter's living room.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of understandable. I think sometimes things happen that are so overwhelming to our emotions that we just sort of kind of shut it down until later on it's safe enough for us to feel it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
And for you, that happened with the poem, maybe at least a little bit.
right.
So,
Yeah, there's
and I
just
think that's
something
a
about
lot of us.
precisely the I I read in a book. It's called The Courage to Create by Rollo May. Wonderful book, and I refer to it a lot. And in it, these aren't his exact words, but the point he's making is the the product, the work of art, whether it be a sculpture, a painting, a poem, a novel, a piece of music, that's secondary to an intense experience that the artist has. So that makes perfect sense to me now with the benefit of hindsight in having that experience then leading to a work of art. And I don't know if there are many artists who would say sitting down at the desk is where I do my most creative work. I think we all have to be kind of out there experiencing something, even if it's just observing, you know, some strange looking people at the county fair. You take that back with you, and that turns into something you probably couldn't have anticipated without then the time to just kind of sit and meditate and think about it.
Yeah, that observation is so huge. I remember being a new writer. I just wrote about this for our news brief that I was a new writer worrying like, where do people get ideas from? And everywhere I
Yeah,
read said just observation, like look, pay attention. And nothing hit home for me harder than during the COVID shutdown. I would like the only place I really went was the dog park. And all of a sudden I had all of these murder mysteries, half
yeah,
concocted murder mysteries that
right.
were occurring at the dog park amidst our neighborhood because that was my whole world at the time. But I found a way to make a story out of it.
Yes, yes,
Thankfully, we have more choices now.
yes. I'm forever inventing stories about people and then telling it to my wife while we're right there in front of the person. And she is always telling me, "You are talking too loud. They are going to hear you," which I don't believe her.
All right. Well, we're up to our special sauce discussion. So, Scott, as a reminder, we like to ask our guests this. This is usually something that is not writing related,
Yeah.
but something that is a skill or a passion or a hobby that you nerd out about and would like to share with us.
Well, I never really considered it a hobby until I sat and thought about it for a while, but I just love cooking. Um, I'm very possessive of my kitchen time. I have no particular type of cuisine. I just love being in the kitchen and cooking. And I have lately decided, you know what? That is my hobby. I like doing it. Um, I want to always be the one cooking in this house. So that's fun for me. A new one that I have come to, I have a nephew who turned me on to fly fishing. I don't get out and fish very often, but I have really um, fallen in love with tying flies for fly fishing. And it's just, I love the detail work, the craft aspect of it. I don't love the expense of the supplies to tie flies, but it's something that I just enjoy doing. And it's one of those things, I guess, like cooking or taking a walk. Um, it gets you to step back for a minute, let your mind just not focus so much on work or the writing or anything, and just kind of frees you up to still be creative, but in a different sort of way, using my hands.
Absolutely understand that. I kind of do it the same way, not with, tying fly fishing lures or anything, but in other ways, just physically manifesting something through action or through
Yeah,
work. All right. So why
exactly.
don't you tell everybody out there where they can find you in the virtual world?
Yeah, well, I do have, and this is something I learned also as my book was coming out, that I needed an author website. So I created one, and it's simple. It's scottmcconnaha.com. No punctuation between the Scott and the McConnaha. And from there are links to a couple socials that I'm somewhat active on. Some of my poems are posted there, links to some poetry readings that I've done, things like that.
All right. And we'll throw that down in the show notes. All right, Luella, let's hit up some good news now.
All right, moving on to good news. Listeners, we always want to celebrate with you. Please send us your good news at podcast@wiwrite.org. Ken, you want to kick us off?
So, for regular listeners, it's probably not going to come as a surprise. I'm going to talk a little bit about golf. We're recording this on Monday, the day after Rory McIlroy won the Masters, completed
Yes.
his back-to-back, entered the pantheon of golf greats. And while that's all fine, I just found it, I watched golf all 4 days of this Masters tournament. I just found it interesting how much I was invested in the destiny, the outcome of a person that I've never met and probably will never meet.
Yeah.
Right. I just wanted, I had other favorites, but once it became clear that he was a front runner, I kind of shifted, I guess, my psychic energy towards willing him to win. And I kind of found that, in the back of my mind, interesting that, I just wanted this stranger that I never knew to achieve this goal that he had always wanted. And I think if we do that more in this world, right, this is me and my soapbox, but if we wish better things for people we never know, things get a lot better around us. How about you, Scott? What do you got for good news?
Yeah, actually woke up this morning to an email from the Wisconsin Fellowship of Poets that a poem that I submitted for their annual desktop calendar has been accepted. So it'll appear in their calendar booklet next year, 2027. And then also this past weekend was the Milwaukee Marathon. And my running days are long gone, but I did do a full and a few halves um, years ago. And my two youngest kids, both in grad school, well, one about to be in grad school, the other one is in grad school here in Wisconsin, ran it. One did the full, one did the half. And it was just really cool to having experienced the pain and torture of training and then race day to see my two kids doing it. There's just something really cool about the vibe of a race when all these runners are coming together, and a lot of runners are nuts, and it's just fun to watch and hear everybody cheering each other on. It was really cool. And then
Yeah.
very personally, I had the best chile quiles I have ever had when we stopped for lunch after the race at a restaurant there in Milwaukee.
Icing on the cake right there.
It was. It was. It's all about me. It's what I need.
There you go. Luella, what do you got?
Well, as I mentioned before, I'm shouting out WWA Press's latest release, which is called "A Thousand Miles of Poetry: Poem Walking Wisconsin's National Scenic Ice Age Trail." And this is by Wisconsin poet Katrina Surwey, as Ken mentioned earlier. She's having a launch party this weekend at Ridge Run Park in West Bend. This episode is going to be published too late to give people a shout out to come, but it's such a lovely event to look forward to. There's some hiking on the trail. There's going to be trail some snacks and some poetry, and I don't know. It just feels very Wisconsin, feels very Midwest. I'm just real excited to go and hang out with some WWA members and celebrate with her. So that's my good
cool.
news.
I met Katrina.
Yeah.
I met Katrina at a poetry reading many months ago, and she was very, very encouraging, very instrumental in just kind of helping me navigate my way around what to do in terms of finding resources on the WWA website for promoting my work and things like that. She's really great person.
I'm so glad to hear it. And I agree. Yeah. And again, listeners, that email address is podcast@wiwrite.org to share your good news. We'd love to give you a shout out.
All right. So I want to thank Scott for coming on to the show today. Listeners and viewers, if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating in your podcast app of choice. This is the type of action that helps us grow the show and to reach out to more listeners. Thanks for everybody joining us in the Midwest Writers Room. I'm Ken Humphrey.
And I'm Luella Schmidt. Words ignite imaginations and spark change. Never underestimate the power of storytelling.
Midwest Writers Room is a production of the Wisconsin Writers Association. Writing and editing by Luella Schmidt and Ken Humphrey. Sound design and editing by Ken Humphrey. Music for the Midwest Writers Room is written by Michael Ramir C. For more information, please visit wiwrite.org/podcast. Thank you.